Hi, and welcome to Disability Talk with Marianne. I am your host, Marianne Mahoney. I am a 25-year-old woman from the Boston area who was born with spina bifida. On this podcast, I interview people from the disability community to understand the issues that matter to people who live with a disability, care for people with disabilities, or work to support the needs of the community. In this episode, I interview Janelle, who is a very good friend of mine, who is a teacher for kids with autism. Hello, Janelle. Welcome to Disability Talk with Marianne. I'm delighted to have you on to my show.
And I'm delighted to be here. I will say right now that I'm dealing with a little bit of laryngitis. So I've got a drink right here that's going to keep me hydrated.
Me too. To start off, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you know me, and then we can get into what you do for work.
All right, sounds good. So I met your family all the way back in 2001 when you were just about to turn 3 years old because your family posted an ad looking for a summer babysitter for you, your brother, and your sister who was newborn at the time. And then I just stayed with all of you, and now I'm proud to call you my sister because now I'm sort
Aww.
of a family, right?
Yeah.
And I was particularly interested in babysitting after I found out that you had some disabilities because I was preparing to become a special education teacher at Boston College. So, do you want to tell the viewers about what disability you have, or?
Yeah, that's actually in my intro.
So I'm going out of sequence here, huh?
Yeah, you are.
I see. Yeah. Okay. A special education teacher in a public school program that serves students with autism and related disabilities. And I also went back to school about 10 years ago so that I could become a board certified behavior analyst. And that just
Also
means,
known as a BCBA, is that
yes,
correct?
BCBA. Yeah. And I apologize for the squeaking in the background. My dog is having a little fun with her toys.
That's no worries.
Let me know if it becomes too much and I can settle her down.
Yeah.
But so a BCBA, just generally speaking, it's a way of trying to improve people's lives with their consent by teaching them the skills then that they need to have in order to live the life that they want to. So I there were times that I felt really ineffective as a special education teacher with just the training that I had, and I wanted to be more successful because there were times where I felt like I wasn't able to help students learn the skills that they really needed in order to be able to participate fully in their community or in the school. So becoming a BCBA just helped me to learn how to break things down into really small parts, basically.
Mm.
And that way I could be a little more successful.
I have to say that knowing how long you've worked as a special education teacher and in like the disability,
Mm.
yeah, you have it down pat what you're doing,
Well,
and
thank you for the vote of confidence. I appreciate
and
it.
you're welcome. And I think it's definitely good to have some sort of confidence in yourself so that, okay, I can really do this.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
yeah,
That's why learning more helped me become more confident. But it also helps when your friends believe in you too. So thank you.
you're welcome anytime. Going on to the second question, can you describe what autism is and how the definition changed over time?
So autism is basically a developmental disability. That means that it interferes with what's more typical development and it's lifelong. A range of what that means. So basically, some people you can't just say that one person with autism is going to then be very similar to another person with autism. It's pretty similar for a lot of other disabilities, right? You've met other people with spina bifida, and they don't necessarily act like you or struggle with the same things that you do. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
autism can be tricky though, because it can impact some people in some really mild ways, and then there are other people for whom autism profoundly impacts their life, and it requires that results in them requiring a lot of support for their entire lives. So it's a little tricky. The definition has changed over time, in the sense that some people years ago, they used to have something on this autism spectrum called pervasive developmental disorder, and then there was Asperger's. So it's a little bit boring to get into all those details, in my opinion, because basically the way that I was trained is, it really doesn't matter what you call something. Just figure out how to help someone learn what they need to learn. What do they want to learn? What are the things that are holding them back from participating more fully in the world around them, whether that's at school or at home or with their friends?
Yeah. And do you feel like it's holding back some of your students, or do you feel like they're actually like learning something and like moving forward with
Yeah.
life and how they take in things?
Yeah,
If
so autism can definitely, it's a neurodevelopmental disability, meaning that it impacts your nervous system and your brain. And they a lot of folks with autism learn in different from maybe the way that the other kids in the general education classroom learn. So we're trying to be creative and find ways that they can learn the same content, or content that's related but a little modified. And so I think that there are some, you have to ask people with autism. There are autistic folks that are very proud of their autism, because I find working with autistic people very interesting, because they're a lot of them are very quirky, and they have a lot of unique personalities, and they're creative. But that's not to say that sometimes some of what comes along with autism, for example, repetitive behavior. I've had some students for whom their repetitive behavior that they do with their hands really interferes with their ability to interact with the world around them and to do anything else. If they're constantly, say, running their running their fingers along a piece of string all day, it's hard to make friends if you can't get out of your own way. And so we're always looking for ways to respectfully help people change their behavior, even if it's just temporarily. Sometimes autistic folks, they really enjoy engaging in certain repetitive tasks, and that's fine, because I'm the same way. There are lots of things that I like to do that are repetitive. When you ask the question, is this happening too much? And hey, how can we teach this student to perhaps just take a 5-minute break from doing that repetitive thing?
hmm
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And going off of what you said, how do you teach them how to take a break from doing whatever they're doing that may be causing like distraction, or maybe like visually that you can see that they're like that you're like, oh, they need to stop that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, yeah, sometimes they're doing something that could actually be hurting themselves if they're repetitively rubbing the skin off part of their body. Um, so, I think what I found to be the most successful is, with working with anyone, you got to build a relationship, and you've got to be able to gain their trust. And for some kids, that can happen really quickly. And for other kids, it's a really slow process, but the process is super important, and it doesn't matter how long it takes, because that's part of getting what we call assent. Assent is just basically getting the child to consent. We say assent because they're not of they're not an adult that gives consent, but they have to agree to something, basically. We try to give a lot of choices. We try to start their day always with them being what we call happy, relaxed, and engaged. And we try to communicate, I'm not going to do things to you. I'm not going to try to control you. I'm not going to try to take over. It's all about you, but we're going to try to take a few breaks sometimes. Once you're willing to give a little bit of cooperation, then it's going to be my turn to be able to teach you some of the things that we think you're really going to appreciate learning, right? So it starts off really slowly with just like 5 seconds of just the teacher being able to. So, in the case of someone who's having repetitive behavior with their hands, it's going to just be 5 seconds of not engaging in that behavior with the hands. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I feel like that's good information that you're giving me. Yeah. How did you get into the field of working with people with autism? Did you hear about it from somebody, or did you read it an ad somewhere?
So I knew from a young age that I wanted to do something in the field of disability. I was always so curious about kids with disabilities and fascinated, and I loved playing with them. I loved interacting with them, hanging out with them. And I, when I was an undergraduate in college, I worked with kids that had complex disabilities with a lot of medical needs. And I ended up, after I met you, and then I got to visit your integrated preschool. I was really interested in that and so fascinated about how inclusion worked. And I really wanted to be part of that. And so my first few years after getting my master's, I was an inclusion facilitator. And that job I enjoyed, but it was a little tricky because my students were in all different rooms, and I didn't get enough uh, of the teaching time that I wanted, because I really wanted to work directly with students and not just manage a plethora of adults. So I then co-taught a kindergarten integrated classroom that had several students um, on the autism spectrum. And then after that, I helped my school district start an ABA-based program that stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, which is that's the field that a BCBA is trained in, and that's the science of learning and behavior, basically. And so I helped start this ABA-based program, and in that program, I've had kids with autism, but also kids with other disabilities that are similar. A lot of kids with emotional disturbance, and which just means kids that are learning how to manage really big feelings. And so I still have several students like that now. Yeah, and so this is going to be my 20th year teaching.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have to say that I'm really proud of you and the work that you are doing. I think their parents must be so grateful to have an amazing, to know that their kid has an amazing teacher like you. They couldn't have found anyone better than you at Hosmer School.
Ah, thank you.
So we're very grateful for you, Janelle.
Oh, I appreciate that, but I feel like I'm the lucky one. I find that the easiest part of my job is working with the kids.
Yeah. So, can you tell me a little bit about your classroom? How many students and teaching assistants do you have?
Yeah, so it varies from year to year, or even within the course of a year, right? I'm going to be starting on Tuesday with students. So I've already gone back to work, but I will be having 7 students. And this year I have students in grades 3 through 5. And the number of teaching assistants always varies, because teaching assistants determined by each student's needs in their IEP, or their individual education program. Yeah, so it varies, and I'm really looking forward to the start of another school year.
Yeah,
And
sounds good.
I should explain, you asked me about my classroom. All of my students are attached, they're all included in a regular grade level classroom. And then some students are in their regular education classroom pretty much all day. And then there are others that we've determined that the special ed team, not just me, but the speech pathologist and the occupational therapist and the school psychologist or the social worker and the general ed teacher, we've all, for some students, we've agreed that the best place for them to learn certain or all academics is in a separate setting, which would be like my classroom, and they work on their learning goals there. Like I said, sometimes it's for part of the day, sometimes it's for larger parts of the day. But the goal in special education is just to give every student what he or she needs. And we work hard to
Gotcha.
try and make that happen.
Gotcha. What does a typical day look like?
That's a good question. There is really no typical day, I find. And that's actually the part of my job that I appreciate the most. There are certainly times where I am envious of someone whose job is really predictable. Now, certainly, I come in and I have a schedule of when I'm teaching students. And so that varies every year because some years I'll have a student that may need me to teach reading in third grade, or then there's a kid after that needs math for fifth grade. It all varies. Within that, I need to be really responsive to what my students need. If they're having an issue managing big feelings, or they're feeling really anxious about something, they're struggling, I could be pulled out for a little while to help the student manage that, and then I would switch with another teacher or a teaching assistant. So that's one of the things that I really like about my job, because it's I'm not someone that necessarily thrives on routines and everything being the same every day. It's my own sort of unique need for my brain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, when I was in school, I had a one to one aide with me.
Mm.
Um, what is the student to aide ratio in your classroom? And does it change from time to time, or is it pretty consistent?
Yeah, I remember I was saying that always varies because it depends on what the student needs and what the team has decided that they need. It always varies.
Hmm.
We try to have students be as independent as possible, but sometimes students do need an extra adult in the room beyond the general education teacher, or some students are working on learning some of the basics and they need to be taught in a one-on-one format. So at those times of day, they may have a one-on-one teaching assistant or one-on-one with a teacher.
Gotcha. Can you tell me something people will find surprising about your job? Like something that when you tell somebody about your job that they don't already know, they'll be like, "Whoa, really?" If that makes
Uh,
sense.
yeah, I guess one of the things that people might be surprised about is how incredibly fun it can be. I feel really lucky that I have a job that gives me so much joy. There's a lot of laughter during the school day. There's a lot of fun, and I am incredibly fulfilled by working with kids and watching them learn, and I feel really lucky. I think people might be surprised to find out how really fast paced and busy it is. I think some people that don't quite understand what public schools are like these days, they might go back to picturing when they were kids. Some adults that are older than you might just picture, oh, the teacher just sits at a desk while the kids are sitting quietly doing their workbooks. And it's not like that at all. I am constantly moving and I have lots of people asking me questions, adults, kids. There's always multiple things happening at the same time. And that's one of the real challenges, is trying to just keep my brain organized, because there is just so much going on. And You have to also be present for your kids, especially kids that you're trying to build a relationship with. They can sense if you're not really truly present and engaged with what they're doing.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. It must be your feet must hurt by all of the running around that you're doing with following your students around and
That's
making
why
sure.
that's why I dress the way I do. So if you ever see me going to work, I always have sneakers on, and I always have pants on that are conducive to running, because sometimes I have to chase after a kid who's little and doesn't understand that they can't run out of the school building because they don't like something, or maybe a kid needs a running break in the middle of the day. And so I've got to take them outside and run on the field.
What brings you the most joy in your job?
I think the most joy is when I see the joy in the kids. So when I can see that a kid feels safe enough and calm enough to just really engage with whatever it is that makes them so happy. And then, because once
Mhm.
we get to that place, then I can start saying, all right, this is great. I love playing this with you. I love doing this game, whatever it is that makes a kid so happy. That's when then I can say, hey, let's see if we can teach you a little bit of this math. And I brings me so much joy too to see kids that used to be really afraid of learning because they thought that they couldn't do it, or they thought it was really scary. And then to see them feel more confident and realize that they can learn, because anybody can learn. I don't care who you are, what you are, all animals can learn. And we're
Yep,
animals.
yep, that's true. When I was in elementary school, my mom worked with the parent teacher organization, also known as the PTO, to make part of the playground accessible. And I know that your school just put in a new playground. And I wanted to know what adaptations make a playground accessible for somebody with autism. Are there like
Good
things?
question.
Do they have like sensory needs? And are there like various things that like they
Hmm.
can touch or?
Yeah,
Um,
so that's a great. Yeah, I remember when that playground project was happening. Remember, you and I had a big campaign to help fundraise for it, and I ran the marathon because you were a wheelchair user, but it was all wood chips on the ground, and so that makes for a really horribly bumpy ride. And so they had to put that kind of springy, oh my goodness, I'm losing my mind, I can't think of the word for it, but the flooring for it makes it really accessible to it. And what's cool about making things accessible and using principles of universal design means that it benefits everyone. Everybody benefits from walking on a surface that isn't wood chips, right?
mhm.
And so for kids with autism or any other developmental disability, one thing that I like to see when I go to any playground, because let's face it, I really enjoy playgrounds myself. I love going to playgrounds with kids, whether I'm at work or not, is varying levels of difficulty. You might have a structure that's there. If you want to get to the top of it, you have to climb and you have to be really strong. And then there are other structures that are lower to the ground. For kids that aren't really into the climbing thing, swings are great. I love swings because I think that they are the most inclusive playground equipment, really, because even if you're all by yourself and you feel a little lonely, or maybe you're choosing to isolate yourself because there's just too much going on around you, you might choose to just go on the swing and relax, chill out. Swings are also able to accommodate kids with a lot of different disabilities. If you have an oxygen tank, you can still sit on a swing and be pushed by your friends, right? Because the oxygen tank can just go right inside the swing with you. It's trickier to make that happen if a kid is up climbing or using another piece of equipment. So swings are great for self-regulation. A lot of kids really get calm through that movement, and it can help them feel a little more calm for even a while after you left the playground. Not for me though. I used to love swings when I was a kid, but when I got to be an adult, they started to make me feel sick. But I think what's important with the playground too is going to other playgrounds, checking them out and seeing, hey, what are the most popular pieces of equipment here? What do we see kids doing the most of? And I like to learn by observing and just watching. What do kids, because sometimes what adults think kids are going to like and be drawn to, they're actually not. So I think that what's really important is that there is something for everyone on the playground. And there's a great organization too in the area called the Play Brigade, and they fundraise and help plan inclusive playgrounds around the Boston area. And there's a lot of great examples of really inclusive playgrounds. There's one outside the newer Spalding Rehab in Charlestown. I love that playground. It's so beautiful, right on the water on Boston Harbor, and it's just so great to see all of the different kids that are there, because some of them have significant physical disabilities, but yet there's lots of ways for them to participate.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What are some misconceptions that you've heard of about people with autism?
Well, that's another interesting question. I think that sometimes people can assume, I guess just making any assumption about an autistic person can be really difficult. You want to make sure that you're including autistic voices in any discussion about them. And that's, let's face it, that's not unique to autism. You wouldn't want me to be writing a book about people with spina bifida, say, but never ask you about spina bifida, right? Like we would want
Mhm.
you to be able to basically write the book with me. And but one of the most common ones that I hear, and in fact, when I was a kid, I knew really nothing about autism. I had read a Babysitter's Club book about it, and it was described as being locked into yourself and like you're trapped and you're in your own world, and that's not really true at all. I think it's hard to know what someone else is thinking or feeling if you don't really know them. But once you get to know someone and you build a relationship with them, you realize that there are so many more similarities than there are differences. And a lot of times people can assume that autistics are not interested in being social. And so that if an autistic person is not really looking at other people and maybe they have their hands over their ears, that must mean, oh, they don't want to be around anybody else right now. But that may not be true. So I think it's really important to give autistic kids time and space to reveal who they are and to make it clear to them that you're interested in them, and to lean into what they're interested in and let them know that you're happy to wait. You're happy to wait until they feel calm enough to join in with you. I think it's I think it's important that we are really focusing on giving them choices and not trying to force them to do anything that they're not ready to do.
Gotcha. Have you stayed in touch with some of the students from earlier in your career? And if so, what are they up to now?
Yes. Oh my goodness. That's one of my favorite parts of teaching, is because one of the saddest parts is saying goodbye to students. And in recent years, I've been teaching kids in some of the upper grades. And so I often am their last teacher before they go to middle school or beyond. And it can be really sad to say goodbye. But the nice thing about that is I can say, now we can be friends and we can keep in touch. And so I have students, oh my goodness, I've run into students sometimes. One time I was at Bertucci's and a former student was working there. And my first thought is, oh my gosh, I feel really old because I still pictured this kid as a first grader. And there he is working at Bertucci's making pizzas. I've had students that it's such a range. Like the students I work with have so many different interests and so many different abilities that There are some students that are in programs like you are. There are some students that have gone on to college. There are some students that are younger now and are in middle or high school, but they're every student that I've worked with has continued to grow and learn after they have left elementary school. I think that's important for people to hear too, because there's a lot of people that will say, "Oh, it's so important in the early years. If they're not learning it, then the window closes," and it really doesn't. I have a friend who's in his 30s now that I used to work with him when I was a teenager and he was little, and he's doing new things. He's doing new things every time I see him. He's saying new things, learning new things. Yeah, that's a really fun part of my job, is keeping in touch.
Hmm. And you just, over time, you get to see them grow and develop new, like, skills over time.
Yeah,
And you mentioned the student working at Bertucci's making pizza.
yeah,
Crazy that when you go from being a teacher, teaching students
reading.
math and reading, and then you go to a restaurant and you see them working there, like making
Exactly.
pizza. And so that's,
Yeah, yeah. Like right now, I'm still blown away that I'm having a professional adult conversation with you, because there are going to be people listening to this podcast or watching it if they watch the video of it. And I think that if they've known you and I over the years, they are probably laughing really hard, going, "I cannot believe these two are doing a podcast together, because you used to be so little and you and I were just known to be strictly fun and get ourselves into trouble. And maybe someday you and I will write a book about some of the adventures that we've had that we can't say right now in this podcast, but you know that some of them are absolutely hilarious." And if you hear, that's just my dog squeaking on her toy.
yeah. Janelle, you bring me so much joy, and
The feeling is mutual.
just seeing you on my screen, it's just the highlight of my day.
I feel, oh, sorry about that. Oh, my little dog feels jealous. It,
Al-
jealous,
Although
good
I
look.
do wish I could see you in person.
Yes, fortunately, I only live about 3 miles away from your new place, right? And
True.
that's one of the things too, is that I don't have any children of my own. And so my students, they become like my school family. And that that's just so fulfilling. And it keeps me tied to the Boston area, I think. I often ask myself, am I going to move away somewhere? Am I going to try something different? And it's so hard because every year my friend list gets bigger and bigger, because there's more students that have left my school and now are doing their own thing, and we're buddies.
Wow. How has your job changed since you've started the field of special education?
It's changed because I think when I first started, I was an inclusion facilitator, which, to the guys I mentioned, it's a great model. It's just, it can be tricky if I'm really not as interested as some other people are in the managerial aspects of it, just straight up supervising teaching assistants all day. I have to do some supervision for sure in my current role, but I think that what I'm really best at is directly working with students, teaching, that sort of thing.
Mm, nice. How do you see your field of work evolving?
That's a good question. I think it's going to be really interesting to see, because I think that there are a lot of problems right now in public schools. We're really struggling to retain special education teachers because for a host of reasons, but I think that sometimes what's expected of us can be extremely difficult, because as much as we as much as we may agree with our administrators about what students need, sometimes it's just given the resources that we have, it can be impossible because I can't be in 5 different places at the same time, or we have to meet students where they're at. And so if I get a student that is so afraid about learning that they literally can't sit in a chair, I have to meet that student where he's at. And I can't expect him to read the whole book right now. We have to start off and just build little bit by little bit. And so that's one of the challenges of my job. You have to have a lot of endurance and a lot of patience, not patience with the kids. I'm saying patience with the process, so that maybe a typical third grader is going to learn his multiplication tables in a couple months, but my students might take a lot longer. And if you're not really looking closely at the data that you collect, you might think that the student's not making any progress, but maybe they're just learning one fact at a time and it's moving slowly, but they're still learning. And you have to be able to appreciate that. And for some people, they're not able to hang in like that. But that's something that I really love about what I do.
If people are interested in learning more about the field of special education and autism, where can they learn more?
Oh, good question. There are, I would say, definitely at the Council for Exceptional Children. That's a great organization. And I can even recommend a few others. I could compile a little list that you could put into your show notes,
Hmm.
and then you could attach them to the podcast or the YouTube channel or whatever you do.
Yeah,
Sound like
sounds good.
a plan?
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who might go into the field of special education? If so, what would that advice be?
I would say I'd first say thank you for being curious and even interested. I think that the other thing is that you want to get as much experience as you possibly can doing so many different things. So you might want to see if you can get some volunteer work done at, say, a recreation department, or doing something that is going to give you some kind of contact with kids with disabilities. You might get a teaching assistant job. You might try to volunteer somewhere and see as many settings as you can, because I struggled. I remember when I was an undergrad, I hadn't seen enough settings. And so I had only seen sort of kids outside of school. And then I saw a school for students with profound disabilities and complex healthcare needs. And you want to be able to see a lot of different places: private schools, public schools, inclusion versus substantially separate, just so you can see how big the field is. And then all of that experience or all of that observation is just going to help you be the best possible special educator you can be.
Gotcha. And finally, do you have any questions for me about being in a wheelchair or having a disability that you didn't know?
Hmm. Let's see. Since I've known you 20 plus years, I've asked you tons of questions. I don't know, what would you say is your favorite part about being in a wheelchair? But you're not allowed to say hitting me with it, because we know that once in a while you can be a distracted driver, and I know that has brought you immense joy watching me suffer. Ha. But what's your favorite thing about your wheelchair that other people may not know?
I'd say that every single time I get a wheelchair, I get to pick the color of it.
I knew you were going to say that. That's
I don't
so
think about what other people are going to say.
You just
Uh,
do you.
I just, you do you.
Now, one
And
thing for you. Do you want people to feel sorry for you because you have spina bifida?
no,
I didn't think so.
yeah,
That's who you are, right?
yeah. And it's interesting to learn about every wheelchair there is out there because some of them have really cool lights that I get to turn on when I'm out in the dark. Some of them have a display screen that all wheelchairs don't have that, and some wheelchairs have different padded armrests And so it's just the little things that bring me so much joy. And
It's so true. I think that's true for all parts of your life. And you've
mhm.
always been like that. Even when you were little, it was the little things. And that's, I think, a nice way to wrap this up, because one of the one of the characteristics that I have seen in so many kids with disabilities with whom I've worked is that they find their joy in some of the smallest things. Like, they don't, and that just makes me feel so fulfilled. I don't need material things, because I feel the joy that you and other people feel. Like when you were a kid, Christmas was so exciting for me, because every year when I would call you and say, "What do you want for Christmas?" you would just say, "I don't know, a present." And it was so refreshing, because a lot of other kids have a list that's a mile long, and you were so content with just me coming over and handing you a present. It didn't matter what was in it. You would often forget to even open it. You just wanted the present was really being with people for you.
You're telling me things that I didn't even remember about myself.
No? Oh gosh. All right, we'll have to talk when we hang up with this session then. I
Oh,
have
yeah.
lots more memories where that came from.
Oh, boy. Thank you for being on my podcast. It was a delight to have you, and I'll send you the episode once it's edited.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show. This is my very first time being interviewed in, on a podcast and on YouTube. This is huge for me.
The plus side is I'm your best friend, and
Right.
your best friend has a YouTube channel.
I love it.
Yeah. All
All right.
right,
Thank
Janelle,
you.
thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.